What is the scariest monster in your opinion? Write a comment. It all started when I was about 8 or 9 years old. Actually, I guess it may have been earlier, but that's around the first memory I have of it. See, I have had sleep paralysis as long as I can remember, although it is rare now that I am an adult. Most people that I've told about this have assumed I'm just scared of the dark or have bad nightmares, but that's not it, although I am and I do, haha. I have always had very vivid dreams. When I was dreaming, I was there, I could see, smell, hear, and feel. I was also a very adept lucid dreamer, having the choice to affect my dreams at will. That didn't work on nightmares though, and I often had nightmares before these episodes, horribly vivid nightmares, almost every night. Dreams of falling, fire, death, being alone in empty space, but mostly monsters, and those were the worst. Some of them were your classic 80s slasher film icons, Jason, Freddy, etc. I think my mom let me watch those movies a little too young, along with reading Stephen King, but she is still my hero. Those usually involved running and hiding while being in a strange place, usually creepy abandoned buildings or out in the woods. The monsters that didn't come from movies were way worse though. Dreams come from your subconscious supposedly, so I guess somehow my mind created them, although as a child it seemed like they were from the depths of hell. Twisted, grotesque things, sometimes vaguely resembling a human form, with missing limbs or too many, hideous faces with skin missing or eyes hanging out of sockets. Some were not human at all however, giant creatures with wings and razor-sharp claws and teeth, black shadows with red eyes that would just stand in the corner and watch me while I went about mundane tasks, like homework or watching TV. Sometimes I would wake up before they got me, not always. People say you're not supposed to die in dreams, but I have many, many times. I have fallen and hit the ground, I've burned up in fire, been stabbed and sliced. I've even had a dream where I was at a funeral that turned out to be mine. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Well, I'm not really scared of the dark, per se, or even scared of the nightmares. I am afraid of waking up in the dark. Let me explain what a typical night was for me when I was younger, and maybe you can start to understand. I would fall asleep in my bedroom with the TV on, mostly for light. Sound would be just loud enough to make out what they were saying. Sometimes I would fall asleep on the couch with the light and sound coming from my parents' room before I had a TV in my own room. Then the dream would start. The worst one ever, which I had often, I don't know how rare recurring dreams are, but I feel I got more than my fair share, would start with me waking up in my own bed. I would be viewing as though from my own eyes, rather than third person as a lot of dreams were. I would look over at my alarm clock and it would say 3:33 a.m. always, then the fear would start. I knew what was coming, but powerless to prevent it. I would slowly place my feet on the floor and stand up while stretching and yawning. I'd start to head for the bathroom, not sure how I know the bathroom was my destination, as I never made it there, and I would trip on something. I'd crash on the floor, hitting my nightstand, causing my alarm clock to fall on my head and bounce to the floor. So I'm lying there cursing myself and looking under my bed. There is nothing there, and I mean nothing. The meager light in my room should penetrate at least a few inches into the darkness, but it's like a wall of black shadow, an empty void. And I freeze with fear. Suddenly 2 small blue orbs of fire appear, directly eye level with me, the eyes of some unknown being staring into my soul. Its breath was the worst part. I would see it and smell it at the same time. I only know it was breathing because it came out in a fog, like when you were outside in winter, only it wasn't cold in my room, and the breath upon my face was cold enough to chill me to the bone, and the stench, ugh. It was as though someone took dead animal carcasses and dirty diapers and lit them on fire with 1,000 matches, like sulfur, burnt hair and shit. My mind would be screaming run, hide, but my body is frozen. I am hyper-aware, I can feel every muscle in my body tense up in preparation, but nothing happens. Then it grabs me, I see nothing, no limbs of any sort, but I am being dragged under the bed. Then I am in total blackness. I can feel its disgusting breath on my neck and hear my heartbeat, but my sense of sight has totally abandoned me. I don't feel arms around me specifically, but I am being held there. It feels like someone has wrapped a blanket made of flesh around me, but it is stronger than I am and holds me completely still. Then I feel its tongue slowly lick from my neck to my ear, as though tasting my fear. In a voice I can only describe as broken glass soaking in blood, gravelly and grating, but wet, it whispers. "What do you like about playing under the bed?" That's when I snap out of it. I struggle and fight, swinging my elbows and kicking my legs hard as I can, eventually loosening the creature's grip, and I would wake up. Here's where the real fun begins. I would be completely frozen, sometimes to the point where I could not even open my eyes. Sometimes that would be all, just frozen for a minute or two, then I would snap out of it. I'm getting a little freaked out even writing about it, the memories are that vivid as it comes out. Other times the nightmares followed me. I remember once, I was lying there frozen, trying to force my eyes to close when I heard that same thick gravelly voice say, "Come back under the bed, the games were just starting." I couldn't turn my head to look toward the sound, not sure I would have even if I could, but I could feel its cold breath on my ear. I guess I must have screamed, although I don't remember doing so, because my mom ran into the room and turned on the light. I swear I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye melt into the floor, heading back under the bed. She checked, assured me there was nothing under the bed. I still don't know what to believe. According to the therapists and counselors I have talked to, I was experiencing visual and auditory hallucinations common to sleep paralysis. They don't know how real it was though. When I would wake up in bed, once able to move, I would jump off my bed, making sure to stay well away from the edge, run to my parents' bedroom, and crawl into bed with them, sadly until I was about 14. Oftentimes though, I would not wake up in my bed as I had fallen asleep. Sometimes after that specific dream I would wake up on the floor next to my bed, which was the worst, especially if the paralysis kicked in, which was often. I've woken up on the couch, on the floor in my parents' room, on the kitchen floor, in the empty bathtub, even once on the porch. On these occasions I would sometimes find scratches and cuts on my body, often small, although once I had a 6-inch gouge across my ribcage, still have the scar. The therapist said this was due to sleepwalking and running into things. My grandmother had a very different view of things. I loved my grandma. She definitely wasn't your regular sweet old lady. My grandmother had a deep appreciation for the occult. When I told her about my dreams, she crossed herself and did that weird little evil eye hand gesture. I asked why she was freaking out. "My dear, 333 is a time of evil," she explained. 3 is a number of Satan, 3 a.m. is the witching hour, dear, when the veil between realms is thin and reality can be warped. It was more likely that it was an actual demon trying to drag you to the underworld. You are lucky to have survived the attacks. She also told me that I wasn't sleepwalking as the therapist suggested, but actually in another, I guess you'd say, alternate plane or dimension, or even the underworld. We always thought she was a little crazy, now I'm not so sure. I wish she was still alive to help my family. Recently, my 7-year-old son has been waking up in the middle of the night, right around 3:30 a.m., screaming about the monster with blue fire eyes. I was holding him after one recent episode, telling him it was a dream and he will be okay. He kept repeating the word no. When I got him to calm down a little, I asked why he was saying no. He said he doesn't want to play under the bed. This is a spooky story about a man who witnessed strange events on his farm. The hay bales started slowly moving away from the house, and then his horses were found decapitated. What happened next? Listen and find out. It was a few weeks ago that the hay bales started creeping slowly away from the house. Every morning when I woke up, each had moved a few hundred feet from where it was before. I assumed it was pranksters with nothing better to do, and so I ignored it. Within a few days, though, the bales began to approach the boundaries of the farm. I was tired of the whole game by then, and decided to move them back. It took a tedious hour to bring them all from where they were to over near the house again, and by the time I was done I was ready to snap the neck of whatever little pissant was deciding to screw with me. The next morning, I found each and every one of my horses messily decapitated. The smell was what woke me up. Each one was slumped over against the side of its stall. There were no signs of the heads. I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the mess and burying the remains. It was only when I was done that I noticed the bales of hay had all returned to their positions from the day before, scattered far out into the fields. This time I left them where they were. That night I sat on my porch with my shotgun in hand and a pot of coffee on the table beside me. I sat for hours, straining my eyes into the fields to catch a glimpse of who was moving my hay bales. Finally, I was beginning to nod off. I would have, but just as my eyes began to close I heard a clamor and a rustling of trees from the nearby woods. I leaned forward, my heart racing with excitement. I was going to catch the bastard. I fumbled with my gun and fidgeted in my seat, waiting anxiously for whoever it was to get close enough to ambush. It was only when the thing got close enough for me to make out its silhouette in the dark that I was frozen still. The thing that crept into my fields from the nearby woods didn't seem to notice me sitting there. It stalked, hunched and deliberate, through the field with the posture of a tiptoeing thief. If not for the fact that it must have towered to over 10 feet tall even in its crouched position, it might have seemed almost frail. The thinness of its arms and legs and the emaciated, caved-in quality of its chest reminded me of a starving animal. Still, this thing was undeniably strong, and I watched it hoist each bale up into its arms with ease, and set it down carefully a while away, taking only a few strides to cover the distance. I watched it work, moving each bale thoughtfully. Every once in a while it would straighten up to look around at the other bale's positions in the field, before adjusting the one it was working on ever so slightly. Before it left, it looked towards the house. I felt its eyes sweep over me in the dark, but whether it saw me or not I couldn't tell. Then, it turned silently and crept back the way it came, disappearing into the dark of the woods. It took me an hour before I had the courage to move at all. I went inside after a while, but didn't sleep that night. It was only when the sun rose that I dared step off my porch into the fields. The hay bales were where it left them. Strangely, it didn't move them as far as it had in the previous days. They were approaching something invisible in the fields, and as I looked at them I realized that they seemed to be marking some line. Indeed, as I walked around the house, I saw the distinct circle that they formed with me at the center. At first I thought the bales were just being haphazardly moved away from the house, but now I could see that they were instead being moved towards some boundary. The thing was sending me a message. I slept uneasily that night, and only because I was exhausted. The next morning the bales hadn't moved at all. They didn't move at all for the rest of that week, in fact. They were finally where the thing wanted them. I made myself sick trying to interpret them. Why would this thing expend so much energy moving my hay bales, and threaten me with such violence should I try to interfere? Killing my horses was just that, a threat. An intelligent threat, at that. It knew what would scare me, and it knew that I would understand the implications. The sound of an automobile working its way along the road to my farm one morning gave me a little rush of excitement. I'd been planning to abandon the farm since I saw the thing, but I couldn't hope to leave on foot without risking it treating me like it treated my horses. But, if I could get in the car with whoever was coming my way, I might be able to escape before it could stop me. I didn't know or care who it was. I decided that the moment they stopped the car, I would jump in the passenger seat and tell them to get the hell out of here. I didn't get the chance. The car worked its way slowly along the road, trundling across the uneven ground. I urged it silently to hurry. It was when it passed between the two bales placed on either side of the road that I began to hear a booming clatter from the woods. The thing burst suddenly from between the trees, sprinting on all four of its terrible, gangly limbs towards the car. Within a few seconds it was there, pouncing on the automobile like a predatory cat. Within moments it was picking and peeling the vehicle's steel frame apart, working to get at the driver. The man, whoever he was, screamed all the while, and I could hear him even over the crunching of metal and the shattering of glass. It was only when the thing crushed him carelessly in its hand that the screaming stopped. It tossed him away, and straightened up to look at me once again. In the sunlight, I could see the inhumanity of it. It was composed entirely of something awful and alive which was lashed together in a messy semblance of a human form. Whatever it was made of looked so polished and hard that if it weren't for the minute writhing of the stuff, I'd think it was made of granite. The thing retreated back into the woods, and I was left to my shock. My eyes wandered to where the car sat, the engine still sputtering, between two of the hay bales. Suddenly, I understood. The message was clear. I am this thing's captive, and I am not allowed visitors. Nothing may cross the borders it has set. I'm trapped here, by the thing that stalks the fields, and it demands nothing except that I never leave. Still, I don't know if I can handle being that thing's canary. I've been thinking hard for the last few days since I saw it crush that man's chest and silence him before he could finish his scream. If I crossed the hay bale border, it'd probably do the same. It'd smash my skull before I could put my hands up to protect myself. It'd go and find a new pet, and probably keep looking until it found someone who could stand knowing that it was waiting just outside, watching it at all hours with its shiny, insect eyes. I've been thinking hard for the last few days, and I might just make a run for it. I was always a quiet child. I preferred playing alone outside to being around people. My dad thought it was because I was socially undeveloped. My mom was convinced I was just more creative than my peers and too smart to relate to them. I would go off to the woods or anywhere outside and make up adventures or create stories for my life. I made up a dozen or so imaginary friends to join me on these adventures. My mom never questioned me about them, and in fact encouraged this behavior. One friend was the favorite, but I never got around to naming her. I named all the others and created backgrounds for them. She was just her. She told me things about people I had no way of knowing, even subconsciously. She was the one that never went away. She was a pale girl that always appeared to have just recovered from an illness. I guess I liked her best because she was quiet like me and watched people. When we walked in stores or down streets, she would whisper in my ear and tell me about the people we saw. He's on his way to kill himself. She's stealing those cookies. Don't look at him. Trust me, you won't like what he wants. I would quietly listen. I never seemed to have to talk to her for her to know what I was going to say. All the other friends faded away and I started school. She stayed up until middle school, constantly telling me each person's terrible secret. I found out who was abused, who was in love with whom, and who cheated on what test and when. I began writing everything she said in a small journal. I was still a loner and my mom became more and more concerned that she was still around and I rarely made friends. If I began to grow close to someone, she would tell me more and more about him or her until I couldn't stand the person. Freshman year, I finally snapped and told her to leave and consciously ignored her. She followed me for a few months, but either I had destroyed her or she had left. I still seemed to have a sixth sense about people, but no girl telling me private secrets. Without her distracting me, I was able to make a close friend in high school. I never told my friend, Amy, about her, because I was already strange enough. I knew if Amy called crying that she was going to call and why she was upset before she even dialed the phone. Amy liked this and relied on me for comfort and for warnings about bad boyfriends or friends. I was more than happy to warn this girl whom I loved. I liked to think I was protecting her. My senior year, my Amy became annoyed with me. If she tried to befriend anyone else, they said I started telling her too many of the person's secrets that I had no business knowing or sharing. I just thought she should know that these were bad people. I was the only good person. I was the person for her to be friends with. Even when she openly avoided me, I was always watching. I slipped her notes about a guy she had a crush on being an abuser or that her new friend was pregnant. After a while, I started to waste away and always looked a little ill. I moved near Amy and was always near her. I began to look younger because I was so frail. Years later, I met a young girl in the woods outside Amy's house. She said she had no friends and liked being alone. Me too, I said, and tell your mom her new boyfriend is cheating on her. This chilling story is about a girl who thinks she's starting to go insane. Hey, Emma. It looks like this project is going to run late, so you'll need to pick up Josie from day camp. I'll do drop-off tomorrow morning instead. I was just shocked by the voicemail. It wasn't that it was unlike Mike to impose on my time and expect him to fix his problems. In fact, that was a large part of the reason he was my ex, but to think I was going to drop everything and pick up some random kid after we'd split 6 years ago was over the top even for him. After listening to the message, I called and told him as much. This isn't funny, Emma. Just because it's my day to pick up our child, you're going to pretend that dash. I cut him off and asked if he'd meant to call me or if he had gotten involved with a different Emma, because I didn't have a kid, certainly not with him of all people. Oh, so now you're going to pretend you're not Emma Sanders. You're so fucking childish sometimes, he said before hanging up. I blocked the number figuring it was probably some prank. Maybe he'd finally started that podcast he'd been dreaming of while we were together, while not actually putting forth any effort into making it a reality, and this was material for it. Not 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. My mom. Convenient, since I was about to call her anyway to vent. Mike called and asked me to get Josie, because he said you wouldn't? What's going on? The room tilted, and it felt like something sharp pierced my heart. Mike might try gaslighting me, I guess, but my own mother? Never. Gulping back a sob, I insisted that I didn't know any Josie. I wasn't a mother at all. Why were she and Mike doing this to me? She didn't even like him, and now she was pretending we had a lifetime connection in the form of a little girl? I'm not sure how much of my speech was coherent, because she didn't respond to any of it. She urged me to stay where I was, and she assured me she was on her way. When she arrived, only the driver's door popped open. That was good. My relief was short-lived, because she stepped inside and announced that she dropped Josie off to play with my friend Carmen and her son. Are you feeling all right? Did you hit your head recently? Genuine concern was etched on her face. I'm ashamed to admit I grabbed my mom and dragged her through the house, demanding she show me one sign that I shared it with a child. She skidded to a stop in front of the spare room and asked me what I'd done with Josephine's things. Jesus, Emma. When did you have time to dismantle the furniture? Wasn't Josie here this morning? Where has she been sleeping? It's an incredibly helpless feeling when your lifelong source of comfort delivers a massive dose of pain and confusion. I wanted her out, but couldn't bring myself to say it. Even in my frazzled state, I knew that if she walked toward the door, I'd throw myself in front of it and beg her not to leave. When she put her arm around me and half walked me, half carried me to bed, I didn't object. My night was plagued with dreams of a child with a smooth featureless face framed by hair that had Mike's ash brown coloring and my waves. The scent of breakfast filled the air. My mom met me in the hall and whispered that Carmen had dropped Josephine off, because Mike was coming to take her to camp. She asked if I felt any better and looked crushed to learn that I still had no memories of her granddaughter. She announced that when Mike and Josie were gone, she was going to take me to the hospital. Sounded good to me. At least one of us needed to be evaluated, and I was going to ask to see the records of this supposed birth. Part of me wanted to hide in my room, but I needed to see this child. Don't say anything to upset her, please. The statement was gentle, but with a hint of warning, and it rattled me. I was used to being the recipient of that protective streak, not being treated like a potential source of harm. I brushed past Mom and glanced around. Kitchen, empty. Living room was the same. I winced as my mom's bony elbow jabbed me in the ribs. Say something, she hissed. Your daughter said good morning. I'd briefly entertained the possibility that I was afflicted by some kind of amnesia, but my eyesight and hearing were just fine. Nobody said anything. There was nobody else here to say anything. There were 2 plates of pancakes on the table. How did Mom explain that? Josie doesn't like pancakes, she patiently explained. She had a banana. I was unraveling. My head felt like it was on fire. Oh, and where's the peel? Let me guess, it's in the garbage. Just like her bed and her mattress and all her fictional toys. Yes. I threw the peel away. I didn't know you'd need evidence of your child eating. My mom had entered the kitchen, kneeling down and circling her arms loosely in front of her, cradling an invisible body. I couldn't help it. I went over and waved my hand through the empty space. Horrified, my mom acted like she was hefting something up into her arms and rushed from the room. I felt suffocated, and the only thing on my mind was getting out of there. I went back to my room and got dressed, then got my keys. I could see my mom standing in the backyard pacing and talking on the phone as I backed out of the driveway and sped down the road. My trip ended at a hotel in the next town. The constantly ringing phone sawed away at my remaining shred of sanity. I tried to find something fun on TV for a distraction, but that failed because the only free channels were news stations, and they were all talking about some man who'd been found pulverized in his pool. I called the police and did a wellness check for my mother, but when I told them my name, I was told something that nearly made me pass out. Miss Sanders, I'm glad you called. Please just come down to the station and talk. We know it was a terrible accident. We know you didn't see her. We just want to make sure you're safe and that you don't do anything to compound this terrible tragedy. Apparently, when I left the house earlier, I backed out over Josie.